Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to Waterstone's Future of Workplace Culture webinar. For those of you logged in about 30 seconds ago, I'll repeat, I'm Marty Parker, the President and CEO of Waterstone Human Capital, and I'm joined today by an incredible group of leaders from some of Canada's top organizations. First of all, with us is John Ferguson. John is the President and Chief Executive Officer of Purolator, and we all know that organization. Brent Gingrich has joined us today, who's the Chief Executive Officer of peopleCare Communities, who are exceptionally working in the long-term care space today, and we have great admiration for absolutely everyone doing that across the country and across the world. And then last but certainly not least, Jeremy Levitt, who's the President of CMH Heli-Skiing and Summer Adventures. I'm sure something that many of us would like to be doing right now, getting away and adventuring kind of some of the mountain air. But we're delighted to have Jeremy from Banff, Brent, who joins us today from Waterloo, and John from the GTA here in Mississauga. So I'm just going to start with a very few words about how and where we see work has changed. We're quite involved in this today at Waterstone, and what that change means for workplace culture. I love the quote from Mahatma Gandhi that says, "The future depends on what you or what we do today." And I think that is never more true than what we're experiencing right now. Just a few examples of the obvious, I would say. Of course, our workplaces are changing as we speak, with less of us, some of us not at all in the office, and planning for some of us in the office staged, others not. A combination of virtual and digital folks working, most of us in the province of Ontario today digitally, those of you in other places in the country and in the United States, many of you in person. Having to experience health checks, having to experience all sorts of new safety and sanitary kind of policies. And of course, that's very fluid. But the workplace is quickly becoming, for many of us, the meeting place, the face-to-face place where culture, connection, and purpose are in the foregrounds. But also travel is changing, many of us not traveling at all, if at all today. And knowing that the future of when we travel, how we're going to go through that experience. Already in Asia, there's QR codes and health assessments for those to travel. And for those of us who are traveling today, we're seeing a much different experience. And of course, we'll ask ourselves how we're going to travel, when we're going to travel, and for what reason. So much has changed. But what hasn't changed, and I think has been enhanced, is that culture through this becomes even more paramount and more important, because your culture is your competitive advantage. However, today our cultures are changing. You've often heard me say that culture shouldn't change unless it needs to, unless we have a crisis. Well, we're all experiencing a paradigm shift today. And thus, it requires us as leaders to really look at our culture, make sure our values are still the same if they are, I'm assuming they are, but that our culture needs to be, in fact, curated to some extent to deal with these workplace changes, and these changes that, to some extent, many of them are going to be sustained and fundamentally transform how we work. The how and what gets done is being replaced by the when and where. And team member experience is really at the center of this. The how our employees and team members will experience culture and the workplace is changing, will have to change, and we will want to get ahead of it. Flexibility and lifestyle, which before were things that needed to be accommodated or dealt with, are now becoming tools. And in fact, the office or the workplace or the meeting place is becoming influenced by lifestyle, being influenced, as it has been for some time, by the creature comforts and spaces at home. And this will continue. There really are some transformational culture success factors that we have seen since COVID-19 has taken its place. Lindsay, I'll just ask you to advance the slide. First of all, wellness is at the center of changes now, which is being enhanced by safety, but certainly this was in place. And for those of us who have benefits programs, gyms at the office, programs at our office, will now be forced as leaders to look at how we provision those to our virtual workplace in the same way that we have our physical workplace. We're being challenged every day as we lead in crisis in terms of communication and how we communicate, have empathy and compassion. But the developing mindset of creating an environment of psychological and physical safety now is being rushed to the forefront. And as leaders, we're needing to be trained to learn to support that and to get ahead of that as our team members are requiring us to do. You know, personal and team performance and reporting is going to change as well, as we have virtual and physical team members working side by side. Many of our panelists today are experiencing that. And what really has happened is that historically our workplaces weren't necessarily built on trust. They were built on earning trust. And today, we really are learning as leaders that we have to give trust as people work virtually. And as I said before, the where and when matters less. It's the what and how. And as we provide that experience to the workplace employment experience, workplace being home or physical, we need to be able to kind of provide and lend itself to more trust. Because as bureaucracy decreases and trust increases, speed also increases. And so this is a fundamental, massive shift that we're now dealing with at a much higher velocity. And of course, training and development for our leaders becomes critical because we're learning to be much more compassionate, creating that environment, whether it be at home or at the office, of psychological, but also physical safety for when people do work at the office or on the front lines. And again, our panelists today will address that. And as purpose becomes more central, in other words, the connection to meaning to work, so must the new cultural workplace experience in this new digitally distributed and changing world. So this requires us to look and replan our culture as we are going through change to support our businesses. So a results-driven kind of culture-centered transformation process is critical, and it requires planning. And frankly, using best practices to use your culture's competitive advantage in both a virtual and physical world is something to consider, because organizations who have high-performing cultures outperform their cohorts by as little as 4 to 6%, in some cases more. And now this high-performance culture needs to be considered in a new environment. And so look seriously at planning the behavioral changes and getting ahead and providing the systems and support that you need. We're currently finding ourselves very involved in these discussions at Waterstone. And Lindsay, if you'll just enhance, if you need help in terms of curating your culture to meet your current environment, not at least the future environment, do give us a call, and we're happy to provide a free 30-minute overview of how we do that. And on that note, I really want to turn to our panel today that I'm so excited to have with us. And the first question I'm going to ask, and I'm going to ask maybe you, Brent and John, to kick us off with this, and then we'll turn to you, Jeremy, on the next question. Maybe in 30 seconds each, describe a little bit about how your culture has helped you weather the changes that this pandemic has brought in terms of the way your company works. And maybe I'll start with you, Brent.
Thanks, Marty. Extremely topical discussion today. Loved your introduction, Marty. Thanks for that. I mean, bottom line, our people show up. Our people showed up. You know, there's been tons in the media. I could go on for far longer than 30 seconds, but our staff showed up. That's the critical piece. You know, in a crisis, long-term care, you know, in a COVID outbreak, we got to have people working. So that's the key.
Thanks, Brent. What about you, John? You've got people on the front lines all over the place. Tell us a little bit about
Yeah, and we have almost a 60-year-old company. And so I look at the history of Purolator, and that we've always had a real desire to serve customers. But I think when we started to get involved with what seemed like healthcare, even though, like Brent, long-term healthcare and hospitals and so on, but the fact that we were moving a lot of medical supplies, we had the words pride and purpose a lot, and it was coming a lot from the front line. So that would be one. And then, The other was just that we have a really long-standing health and safety culture that really emerged even stronger in this period. So had we not had that, it would have been more challenging. But those are two things I think about, is that pride and purpose, the fact that we were moving medical supplies and everybody was getting, behind that, and the overall health and safety culture that we'd already had.
John, I'm just going to ask you if you can look on your screen, if you can turn your video on. Somehow it's flicked off on us.
Okay.
And maybe Lindsay, if John's having issue, we can help out. Jeremy, I'll turn to you on the next question. Oh, there we are. John, nice to see your smiling face again.
Sorry about that, guys. Yeah.
That's okay. Jeremy, maybe you can kick us off, and then I'll go back to you, John. As leaders, we've really had some pretty difficult conversations over the last number of weeks and months now, whether it's laying off staff, whether it's closing offices, or in some cases asking our teams or our colleagues to put themselves, at risk potentially if they're on the front lines. How did you approach this kind of leadership and the employee communications that you needed to drive during this time? And now that you've had to do that, what lessons did you learn in the peak of this crisis that you can kind of employ as we slowly but surely and at different times and stages roll our nation and others around the world back to work?
Sure. So, the first key to my approach was to over communicate. We started having regular town halls every couple of weeks with really super transparent, ask me anything style Q&As, and then really empowering my leaders to carry that through to their weekly and daily departmental meetings. And, one other thing that we did, a couple of weeks into working from home, I wrote a letter to the entire company just talking about the crisis and the impact that working from home was having on myself and my family. And then every Friday after that, a different senior leader wrote their own letter to the company about how it's impacting them and their family. And just that authenticity that it brought to the table, I thought really won us a lot of trust. And, just being able to acknowledge the uncertainty as a leader, it's okay to say that I don't know. And we try to answer as many questions as we can, but there are things that we don't know. And then, my takeaways from all this is that in times of crisis, people want to be led, and they want to know that their leaders have a solid plan. They want to understand their role in that plan, and they want to know that they're being appreciated and valued.
Jeremy, thank you. John, complex, not just Canadian, but multinational business, many different lines of business, many different people, a lot of moving parts. Same question really is from a communication standpoint, what did you do and what did you learn that will help you kind of, I hesitate to say in your case back to work because Purolator never sleeps.
Yeah. And it is a complex question, even though it's communication. Similar to Jeremy, we did a lot of over communicate right out of the gate. And immediately when this started to really heat up, even before that, we were out with a pandemic plan because we were watching the supply chain issues emerge out of Asia and China. And so I like to think we had a bit of a head start in a way in communicating preparedness. But when it started to really heat up, we went to a daily leadership call as an example. So we don't do that but every day we put on Microsoft Teams right away and had we have a call every day still at 5 p.m. where we go through all the issues of the day. In terms of frontline communications, which is really the most challenging, because basically our employees are out in delivery vans and trucks all day long. And we really put in digital tools to help with that. So we put in digital signboards or digital displays in every terminal and started to push out a lot of video, direction and issues and what we're working on, what we're going to focus on and so on to stay well and healthy. The other is just the mobility device, what we call a scanner in the courier's hands. Fortunately, we had upgraded and invested in the latest technology, which is allowing a lot more ability to put on messaging to those frontline workers. I think the other thing was just in terms of style of communication and what we learned along the way, there was a lot of anxiety. I would assume similar to the long-term care homes and so on. So we were really dealing with a lot of, even personally, I would call different leaders that might have some positive COVID cases and try to work with them on on that empathy piece that you brought up in your introduction, Marty, but, making sure that people didn't feel responsible necessarily. Like I found there was a lot of people in terminals and so on that would have a positive case and felt that they had done something wrong. And in fact, one of the great things we did is we brought on a corporate medical director in partnership with Cleveland Clinic. And we were actually in process of doing that before COVID hit. So having someone like that, a medical practitioner, come on and talk about the issues related to staying well and how long the virus will last on a package really, really helped with anxiety. And in those March days of COVID, everybody was a heightened degree of anxiety. And then they'd have to go home to their family after as well. So can you imagine the burden of, of almost an overtime like day? We were so busy, and then going back and to your family. So we had a range of frontline corporate head office people, all with really different needs in terms of how we communicate. The lessons learned, I think that we have now a closer connection with the front lines through this crisis. And people, I think the other big thing that was important of communication was that feeling of disconnected. So you're so used to going into an office, and now you're disconnected. What do you do? And so people were craving communication and craving getting on a digital platform like the one we're on today.
John, that's some terrific examples. Thank you for sharing them. Brent, over to you. Yeah, I know you could speak for hours on the subject, being in the long-term care space, but tell us a little bit about, these challenges and how you dealt with them.
Communication specifically, Marty, or just generally?
Well, no, meaning I should have been clearer. My apologies. Being an essential service, people on the front line, it could be communication, but what were those other challenges? And I'm sure communication was one of them that persisted and persisted.
Yeah. I mean, this is a killer virus. It's devastating for our residents. If they get it, it's life-threatening for most of them. And as well, it's a risk for our staff and our staff's families if they take it home. So bottom line, as I mentioned earlier, it's critical that we have our staff team members, like Purolator, we never close, 24/7. And really long-term care became, the focal point of this pandemic as tons of resources and social isolation and social distancing and other measures rolled out. In fact, our hospitals that were well prepared for COVID actually were running at half capacity. So we didn't see the big surge in hospitals that we thought, and the resources that were put into those areas were not needed in those areas. However, the resources we did need was in long-term care. I mean, we deal with influenza every year, and it's deadly for our residents. We've dealt with SARS, we've dealt with H1N1. All were devastating. But once we learned that this bug, was far more deadly, and with the level of asymptomatic spread that we found out about, it became extremely difficult to contain. And once it got into our homes, if it did get into your homes, it was deadly. And early on, before some of these directives that came out, like universal masking and assuming all your staff has COVID, before they came out is when a lot of long-term cares had issues. Now we implemented those measures before the directives, so I think that served us well. But in order to implement them, you needed PPE. You need to protect your staff. Again, I think as was mentioned, leadership and showing leadership is extremely important. Protecting our staff was very key, and making them feel safe and listened to and educated on how to properly use PPE, in a COVID positive environment. Again, very, very difficult, very, very difficult to convey. for our regulated staff, our nurses and such, we found, this is just to write another day at the office. I mean, they're trained to deal with this environment. But for our personal support workers, our housekeepers, our dietary workers, they're not used to wearing PPE, and they're not used to working in such a crazy environment. And because our sector is so highly regulated in many aspects and of the operations that we simply can't control, largely the government controls a large part of our operations. In fact, to deal with the crisis, the government actually had to eliminate all the regulations that we operate under. So they essentially waved a wand and said, you don't have any operations, you listen to our directives. And that's kind of the crisis environment that we went into, and it allowed us to bring in much more personnel than we were able to. As I mentioned, getting PPE was a big issue initially, and the sector rallied, and through good couriers like Purolator, we were able to fly stuff in from China and protect all our staff. And once communication got out there, our staff became comfortable, and in COVID positive environments would show up. But you also talked about opportunities, and because there's such a microscope on our sector right now, I think there's tremendous opportunities to change. Our association, which I'm heavily involved in, have been advocating for serious changes to our sector for years and years, and I believe now we have the opportunity to do that for the better.
Interesting. John, did you find any opportunities through this thus far in terms of that could improve the business opportunities for additional levels of either service delivery otherwise at Purolator?
Yeah, and I probably need a whole hour to go through them all, because it's huge amounts of change really that Jeremy and Brent have both acknowledged. But the one that's really quite interesting is that our health and safety numbers are the lowest and best on record in our history. And some would say, well, it's because there's no traffic out there, but I'm even talking in hubs and sortation centers. So we've somehow learned to be even safer as a company through this. And I don't know if it's just the social distancing, or we're sort of trying to assess why, but it's been really quite an improvement of an already really good performance in that area. The other opportunity is just the whole digital training onboarding. We're going to actually be hiring 1,000 new employees in the next, if we could hire them tomorrow, we would. And up until now, pre-COVID, we would do, physically onboard someone in person and have them do driving tests and things like that. And now we're having to try to do this, with digitization, where, the technology will actually determine the ability for someone to drive a van, for example, and so on. So understanding how digital will remain as we come through COVID is a big opportunity. But just in terms of the business, the one that's the massive opportunity is just in e-commerce. Now, that's a business opportunity, but the amount of transition to e-commerce is unbelievable, actually. I'd like to say we're awash in volume right now, and we just have so much demand for e-commerce. There's tremendous backlogs out in the marketplace. Fortunately, we have managed that pretty well, but the healthcare to the home, e-commerce to the home, grocery to the home are trends that are here where we might have predicted they'd be here 5 years from now. Yeah, and changing all of our projects and product development to suit that, to how do we enable that, not just through hiring, but how do we actually change contactless delivery? How do we have what we call mobile quick stop trucks, which are basically, we turn trucks into looks like a food truck. You come and get your package from it. So how do we do things without having physical contact? there's a tremendous amount of opportunities that are helping us be a better business, improve processes. In the heart of this thing, when there was so much in that March timeframe, so much uncertainty, which Jeremy and Brent talked about, like every day you were learning something new. Well, masks, then it's no masks, and then you would have medical evidence to support a new way, and you would learn all of that, bringing that into the workplace now, including coming back to a head office. So tremendous amounts of you hate to say opportunity, I call them silver linings. There's some silver linings, and we've tried to remain as positive as we can in this to say, look, there are some things we've learned, we can be better, and our lives can be more balanced maybe at the end of this as well.
Yeah, agreed. Great. Some great examples, gentlemen. Jeremy, I want to ask you this question, and that is, as a leader, your role in supporting your team and organization through this obviously has challenges with communication and otherwise, but what I'd like to focus on is moving forward. What do you see as your role in terms of helping them come out of this positively? And what have you been able to do in terms of to put your culture to work, in other words, through this situation to kind of improve the overall performance of the business, coming out as we open up and as business kind of returns?
Aside from the time that I spend on setting strategy and adjusting to the new environment, nearly the entire remainder of my time has been spent on culture and people and helping them excel. And whether it's one-on-ones with my direct reports or where I act as a sounding board for my people or the town halls, I always really try to be very present and to be visible. I want to be in the trenches alongside my people. This is how I operate pre-pandemic as well now. Just makes it a little harder doing it from home, but trying not to be a Wizard of Oz leader, someone who's just behind the curtain, hard to get a hold of. And that what that does is really allows people to give your people a platform to ask questions. Everyone in the back of their mind is concerned about their job. At its height, the unemployment rate in Banff was 85%. And so if you didn't work at CMH or you didn't work at a construction company, you were unemployed and you were just kind of waiting, when it was your turn. And so that over communication that I've been talking about was just key. And so giving our people a platform has really enabled them to tackle the tasks and the strategies that we've laid out for them and really just go get things done and be able to see CMH through to the other side of this.
Super. Brent, let me ask you the following question if I can, and then I'd like to ask the same question of you, John. And that is, as we look forward to whatever the new normal looks like, and what we expect it to look like, what do you think will, go back to the way it used to be? Maybe it's a little bit new and improved, but what do you think won't change?
I think strong leadership, Marty, and in my sector, it's been glaringly obvious to me. Been involved here for 25 years. What the missing elements are, and as the heightened exposure of LTC, not only in Ontario but across Canada and across the world. To be honest with you, we felt the same issues from Australia to England to Sweden to Germany to the United States to Italy. Like it's long-term care is kind of tough all over right now. But to me, the common thread missing element in Ontario has been the lack of shared vision and a shared mission, really, of what we're not what we're trying to do. We all know what we're trying to do. It's more like what the most effective way to do it is. And culture is such a key element in that. Always look back to the things that won't change and as an organization, we've fortunately done this very well and been able to hire a president. And now I see my role in really helping the rest of the sector, get through this and get to a better place. Resident-centered decision-making, that's been the key to our sector. Everyone's known about this, has been talked about it. But then it's about, okay, how do we affect that, right? How do we affect that resident-centered approach? And it's, our ultimate goal, our ultimate test of quality has to be, meeting or exceeding our clients, residents, or family expectations. So if that's then the goal and our definition of quality, then how do we best affect that? And it's really through, strong leadership, having a vision, and then it's surrounding those that interact with the residents or frontline workers, giving them the tools they need to do the job, whether it be a good pay, PPE, education, training, oversight. Oversight's very important, but if oversight's done the wrong way, it can be extremely demotivating and can impact the culture in an extremely negative way. So we need this guiding principle across all our stakeholders, not just in our own organizations or in our own sector, but with government, our regulators, our social healthcare partners, hospitals, our local health integration networks, placement. So it's extremely important that we all understand that culture and fostering a high performance culture directly relates to being resident centered. So it's that whole message to get that across the lines is my my undertaking for the rest of my career, I think.
It's a heady one for sure. What about you, John?
Well, I think the first thing I could think about is that health and safety part of Purolator, but also, about our tackle hunger, our commitment to food and food banks across Canada. So a lot of the things that we've had for 60 years aren't going to change through this period. In fact, they're probably going to be even stronger. So similar, response around culture and people and the importance of health and safety and the importance of all our social cause and everything else. The other is our commitment to the service side of the business. We have a culture that it was here before my time, even for sure, is the culture to serve the customers. Like our frontline, our couriers, it doesn't matter if they've been here a year or 40 years, they would just work until they get the packages delivered. And it bothers them to see a terminal that has freight or shipments left on the floor at the end of a shift. So I don't think that those sort of core things, values, like the DNA stuff, throughout that, we have 12,000 plus employees. I see that remaining the same, but with all the newness of what we have having to do to keep people well now through post-COVID is sort of layered on top. But those core items, those core things, and there's lots of them, but I just mentioned a couple of the major ones.
Terrific. Jeremy, I'm going to start with you, and then I'll come back to you, John, on this question. And we did a survey, our Waterstone Insight survey, to a number of Canadian business leaders. And one of the things we heard was that leaders wanted to invest in their people, particularly other leaders, as it relates to training and developing them. The secondary we heard was innovation. We've talked a little bit about that already. Was going to be important through this crisis and coming out of it. Are either one of those on the radar for you? And if so, maybe tell us a little bit about your thinking.
Sure. Before the pandemic, we had started to embark on replacing our homegrown proprietary ERP system. And, when we got to the pandemic and our revenues went to zero, as pretty much the entire tourism sector did, we had an internal debate on whether we should pursue this. And there was some time. Our salespeople were going to be freed up a little bit. And so we decided to push on. And we've had a lot of interdepartmental task force be created, people who wouldn't get a chance to work on such a project. We've moved into that role. And I think it's really increased engagement. People are contributing their subject matter expertise to this project that's going to move CMH into the 21st century. And it's been really great for our culture.
Wonderful. John, what about you?
Well, we have doubled down on virtual training and done our best to move. We had a lot of training going on prior to this. We had really been focused on what we call our unit manager, frontline training, frontline supervisor training, which was a huge campaign for us. But now that we're hiring so many new couriers, sorters, and even unit managers, we're having to really double down on the virtual training. So 100% we're going to be investing probably even more, which is a shocker, because in March we were looking at scenarios of look, most of our business that we serve was being shut down. Like, I don't think anybody could have seen this e-commerce wave that hit us. So that's the second thing. The innovation that you ask about is all now repurposed more in the short term to deal with this massive market shift to residential delivery for a company like Purolator, which has traditionally been going to Brent's business and others, businesses across Canada. We still are doing that, but now we've got this big shift earlier than we predicted to e-commerce and residential delivery. So the innovations are things like, how do we get our receivers, the customers, to have way more choice, to pick up where they want, to have it directed somewhere where they don't have to engage with our couriers. So there's all kinds of things that are, they're not exactly, massive disruptive inventions, but they're innovative around improving process, continuous improvement, and customer service.
Yeah, any business, particularly one your size, to move from predominantly a B2B with B2C to potentially switching that, flipping that, is a massive undertaking. And you're doing it, while going through one of the biggest paradigm shifts, maybe the biggest that we'll ever experience as leaders. So a tribute to you and your team, John. I've got a individual question for each of you, and then one I'd like all three of you to answer before we wrap up. And first of all, I'm going to start with you, Brent. Obviously, you talked about this earlier, and for sure our physical workplaces, no matter if you're in long-term care, the hospitality tourism business, the logistics business, it's forever changed. And how are you keeping people, physically safe, as you talked about, but doing it without it negatively impacting the culture of your business? I mean, I know it's a bit of a loaded question, but nonetheless, I want to ask it of you.
Hey, thanks, Marty. I mean, we're caregivers, right? So we go into close contact with our residents, and it's hands on the resident, hands on the wheelchair. So, we can't avoid that, and nor should we. We have to embrace that role and just, again, make sure, we're keeping up with the right research and about this virus or other viruses, or things to keep our residents and our staff safe, and getting them the tools they need to do the job, and the right amount of staff at the right times and right amount of personnel. As far as physical environment, unfortunately, almost half the homes in Ontario were built in the 70s and still have these antiquated design guidelines that were built in the 70s. The basic room, so if you can't afford a private, you're in a basic room, which could be four residents in a room. These were maybe acceptable in the 70s, however, are completely unacceptable now, and do not allow us to properly isolate residents. So we've been advocating the government to help us rebuild these homes for the last 20 years. And finally, they got the message because of COVID, unfortunately, devastating results. But so we're going to be undertaking a massive capital program. But in the meantime, it'll mean lower occupancies in our homes. So, where there's been maybe 4 beds in a room in the past, there might only be able to have 1 or 2. Where there are 2 beds in a room in the past, it's definitely only going to be 1. So that will take occupancy, and I don't know how Ontario is going to be able to care for everyone that needs long-term care. It's going to be very difficult. But the bottom line is, it really puts the fire in the government to get this capital program going. That's been really dragging for the last 20 years.
Thank you. And that's a Herculean effort. So we're glad to have someone like you supporting it and driving it with your colleagues. Jeremy, for those of us who've had to lay off, furlough, et cetera, folks during this crisis, how are you managing or planning to manage the callback, if you will, to work? And how do you manage the message both to those people coming back, but now to those who also have been driving the ship forward and are going to have to support this kind of gradual shifting back to the new norm.
Yeah, when we had to close down in mid-March, we shortened our season by about 45 days, and we recently just canceled our summer operations as the borders remain closed. And you know, we took care of those people. We made sure that we got them pay for the leave, and then, you know, let them know that we're going to be back. We're not going anywhere, and we have the staying power. And so, you know, in the lead up to winter, which we plan on running for the last half century, we've been refining our guest experience and perfecting it. And now in these next 6 months, we're doing everything we can to look at every aspect of it to make our operations COVID friendly. And that way, when our guests do arrive, you know, not only do they know that we're going to be safe, but also our staff know that they can come to work in a safe place. And so that's just been a Herculean effort on our company. There's over 100 people working on that effort right now. All of our full-time staff are focused on that, and you know, we're going to be back, and then we're going to be there for our employees.
Terrific, thank you, John. You know, everyone's reacting differently, and understandably so, around social distancing or the self-isolation we've been through. You know, some will want to run back to their workplaces. We have those in our organization. Others are going to be challenged by the idea of getting to the office, either because they have to transit to the office or just being there, period. So what kind of types of conversations and plans are you having with your teams to support this, as we talked about in the onset, kind of you know, collaborative, but also you know, physical virtual combination environment?
Yeah, so we've just gone to the age-old survey method, I guess, and that was our way of collecting, both in the U.S. and Canada, how everybody felt about working from home, pros and cons. Are you more productive? Our tone has been much more accommodating than directive. It's been, you know, what would you like? Now, I think we've had some learnings. We know now there's certain people at our head office that are probably more effective at home. And I think some are happier, right? They don't have commutes. They don't, you know, they can work out in the morning maybe and use that time to be even more around wellness. So I think we're going to be smart about it, and we're not rushing. At Purolator, we're not rushing that part of it. In our minds, there's no real reason to take a big risk from a healthcare standpoint and get back to a head office and have people in elevators and everything else. Like, how do you get 500 people in 3 elevators in the morning now, right? And so things like that. So we're going to be very patient around the timeline to do that, because we're actually being very effective. I mean, I don't think our preference is to be in this mode, but we're still being pretty effective. And so there's not a burning platform to get back to our head office.
I think that's a pretty common experience, particularly for those in-office environments. And we're thinking that through. So a question for all three of you. And maybe I'll start with you, Brent, to go to Jeremy, and then John, you can hit clean up for us here. And that is, what do you expect will be, number one, maybe one big challenge that companies will face moving forward, and possibly one opportunity and maybe in your case it's yours, moving forward as we progress through this change and out of this change. Brent?
Yeah, thanks, Marty. Difficult one. Many challenges. I worry about the economy. I worry about small business. I mean, this thing has just spun the world in a 360 in days. So it's I really worry about our economy, our capital markets. My sector is heavily government funded. I worry about where the government's going to get all the revenue. Yes, they're printing money, but that's got to end, right? So how do we afford all these expenditures that we're making to stabilize the economy and stabilize healthcare to the expectations of our our consumers and our residents and families. So to me, that's going to be a challenge. Where does the money come from? Number two, you talked about opportunities. Again, for us, for strong organizations that have weathered COVID well and exceeded their peers, I think they'll be extremely well positioned, in the new normal, to carry and lead their respective sectors and or new sectors that evolve.
Thank you, Brent. Jeremy, one of what you think will be the biggest challenge and possibly a significant opportunity as well.
Yeah, biggest challenge for companies, I think, are how can you maintain a strong culture while permitting a large portion of your workforce to work remotely? Something John touched on, like how do you onboard people and ingrain them into your culture remotely? That's a tough one. There needs to be, in my opinion, generally an incubation period where you're around everyone in the office. And then opportunity would be sourcing talent from outside your geographic area, especially in a small town like Banff, where we are headquartered. That's going to be huge for us now that we've proven the work from home thing is real.
Jeremy, we've already seen it in executive search assignments where we've had clients almost completely change face to say, hey, maybe we should be looking even farther afield. Maybe they don't need to be next door in the office next door to us or as often. That's a massive paradigm shift in a short period to see that. I think that's interesting. John, big opportunity and a big challenge for us as you move forward.
Yeah, there's lots of both. That's a good thing. Lots to pick from. On the challenge front, and I'm going to just take it from Purolator because that's where I'm focused on, and it's really the uncertainty that everybody's talking about. But in our case, it's the uncertainty of demand and volume with capacity. So we hire 1,000 people, and that demand better hold up for us, and we think it will. So there's a bunch of things. Just tying those two, massive volume and capacity together, and having them aligned and not way out of whack is super important to our business. On the opportunity front, we're finding that there's so much disruption in the last mile or this e-commerce space, and so much backlogs. We have a massive opportunity because we're performing well, and the speed of our network. Like I personally, if I go online to order, I've ordered a few things myself, and I see Purolator, and it's not because I'm running it. It's like, oh, I'm going to order that because I know I'll get it in a day or two, versus a month. I miss Mother's Day presents and all kinds of things. So I've learned my lessons to use Purolator, and for me, that's the big opportunity, that Purolator service and speed is going to really be a differentiator. And so just harnessing that is our biggest opportunity.
I definitely echo John's comments on different couriers.
Thank you.
I won't name names.
No.
We've had some terrific discussion here. Just to sum it up, I mean, it's clear that you all feel your culture is driving your performance even through times of challenge. And we, behavior is, your culture is being challenged. Behavior is being challenged. Values are typically remaining the same, but seeing that as inspiring. Communication, innovation, change, driving opportunity. And in many cases, these are difficult. I mean, most cases, these are real challenges, and that we've never had to face before. But also, how do we develop our people? How do we, as you talked about, Jeremy, with a massive shift in the workforce, ensure that people have the same, I would say, workplace brand experience when they may or may not have the opportunity to be in an office, or even for some time. And then not to mention looking out to the future as to where are we going to source our folks from. I mean, I can only imagine, John, with 1,000 new people, how the discussions and debates are going to be going in terms of, now, if you have to deliver packages, that's one thing, but supporting those people will be another. So there's a lot of change going on, but your cultures clearly are your competitive advantages. And we want to thank John Ferguson from Purolator, Brent Gingrich from peopleCare, and Jeremy Levitt from CMH Heli-Skiing and Summer Adventures. This has been enlightening, inspiring, and reassuring. And it's great to have leaders like you with a very real, very direct, but an optimistic and forward-thinking mindset. So we thank you all for joining us, and we'll look forward to having our futures be bigger than our past. So thanks on behalf of everyone at Waterstone Human Capital.